Eleanor Hargrove, or just Ellie, was the quiet shadow in the auto repair shop in Livingston, Montana. No rings, no medals, only oil-stained gloves and the coarse canvas bag she carried every day. But what lay behind those tired eyes and that heavy silence? A young Navy SEAL shattered it all, with a single code name no one else had ever heard. Can a name resurrect an entire war? If you're curious, subscribe to the channel and uncover the story where silent legends are honored. Ellie Hargrove didn't belong to the noisy rhythm of the small town she lived in. At 67, she still walked into the Rusty Wrench auto repair shop every early morning, 15 minutes before anyone else. Slowly, steadily, she stepped across the cracked concrete floor, her worn rubber boots making the faintest sounds, not enough to draw attention, but enough to let you know. Ellie had arrived. No one waited for it. No one needed it. Yet her presence had become so familiar that if she were missing, someone would notice. She wore a faded denim jacket, its edges frayed, stained with old grease like time-worn scars. Her safety goggles always rested on the bridge of her nose, even when there weren't any sparks flying. No one asked why. Everyone had gotten used to it, as if she and those goggles were a single, inseparable thing. They thought she was odd, and they weren't wrong, at least not through the shallow lens most people see through. Ellie didn't smile, not because she was unhappy, but because it simply wasn't necessary. Jokes about Nixon's era barely lifted her eyebrow, not because she didn't get them, but because they no longer seemed worth a reaction. To the young men in the shop, she was the old woman with the plain canvas bag. No logos, no past. To them, Ellie was like a quiet ghost, drifting through the workday without bumping into anything, without making a sound. They didn't see her, but they always felt her. Every time she passed by, the air seemed to dip a degree. The shop owner, a Vietnam War veteran, saw something the others didn't. Not because he knew, but because he remembered the way someone held an object when their life had once depended on it. Ellie held a wrench with unnerving precision, never missed a turn, never shook, like she'd once handled something far heavier, something that could take a life if mishandled. The way she extended her hand, the way she moved in the tight space between engines. There was no excess, no rush. Everything felt measured, as if predetermined long before. She didn't speak about herself, didn't join in on family talk, didn't care about baseball scores or weekend weather. When someone clumsily asked about her husband or kids, she'd just shake her head. Not angry, not sad, just a shake. And her eyes, they didn't meet yours. They glanced past you, through the rear window, as if checking for an invisible exit. A reflex, a habit carved into her bones by survival. Not defense, but alertness. Embedded so deeply it became instinct. Beneath the loose strands of her silver hair, just at the base of her neck, was a small scar, curved like a question mark, as if the past itself had once questioned the life she had lived. No one noticed. They saw the shadow of an old, quiet woman. They didn't see the soldier who once knew when to stay silent and when to vanish. Ellie didn't tell stories, didn't leave traces, but each step she took spoke of a history that only she carried. Ellie always sat in the same corner of the shop, back against the wall, eyes on the entrance. No one asked why, just as no one ever asked why she was never absent, never late, never took a day off. Her presence was like an old iron door, not pretty, not new, but always opened on time and shut when it had to. She sat there, not to rest, but to observe. Something in her gaze made people hesitate to approach, as if she lived in two worlds at once. She was part of this place. But no one knew. Ellie had never truly belonged here. She was present, but not connected. She gave, but wasn't bound. Ellie was the question no one dared ask. The memory no one knew still lingered among them. Ellie Hargrove always arrived early and left late, a quiet fixture in the backdrop of the rusty wrench auto repair shop. But that morning, a mist-heavy October morning, something in the air felt different. Outside, the world moved on as usual, but inside, within that small, silent space filled only by the hum of an old country song on the radio, change was coming. She was crouched beside a '78 Ford, sinewy arms rolled to the elbows, tightening bolts with a precision no one could fault. Her movements were steady, as always, as if nothing in the world could shake the resolve that had long since hardened into her nature. Then, the front glass door trembled, not from the wind, but from someone entering. The doorbell gave a soft chime, not loud enough to startle, but just enough to make time hesitate. He didn't belong there, not just by his looks, but by the energy he carried. The kind only those who've stood on the edge of life and death can recognize. He was young, maybe 32, dressed in a perfectly pressed Navy SEAL uniform. His polished boots gleamed. The name tag on his left chest caught the light like a signal. It read, Donovan, not as an identifier, but as a declaration. Donovan didn't look around, didn't ask for directions, didn't appear out of place. He walked straight ahead, every step deliberate, as if everyone and everything in his path had already been accounted for. When he stopped, just 3 paces from Ellie, all conversations in the shop ceased. Even the radio seemed to quiet, as if the room itself had begun to listen. One word left his mouth. Wraith. Time, for a breath, froze. But Ellie didn't flinch. She didn't drop the wrench, didn't gasp, didn't show anything, except a slow, measured glance. Her gray eyes, usually cold as steel, now locked onto his like a vice. In that look, something ancient stirred, not memory, but instinct, a recognition that needed no explanation. She stood, not quickly, not decisively, but slowly, as if every vertebra in her spine needed permission to move. Gravity itself seemed to pause, then bow in acceptance. Ellie didn't ask why. She didn't need to. That name, Wraith, had once been everything she knew, everything she was. Donovan repeated, his voice lower this time, but unmistakably clear. Wraith, we need you. No one understood what was happening. None of the mechanics who'd worked alongside her for years could grasp the weight of those 2 syllables. But they felt it, like a sudden chill slicing through skin, sending shivers up their backs without knowing why. The air thickened, as if someone had opened an old door, and behind it, an entire buried world had begun to stir. A young mechanic, hands still slick with oil, whispered, Wraith? Like a ghost? No one answered. No one dared break the silence. Sacred and strangely terrifying. Ellie didn't turn to him, didn't respond to Donovan with words. She simply nodded, soft but firm. And somehow, within that nod, lived an entire lifetime. A story never told, a history never acknowledged. Everything Donovan needed to hear was already there. He knew, because he'd been trained to recognize it. And the rest though clueless, found themselves spellbound by a moment they didn't understand. No one moved. No one breathed too loud. That instant became a point of no return. Because from this moment on, Ellie Hargrove was no longer just the lonely old woman in the machine shop. She was Wraith. And somewhere, someone had just awakened a ghost. Donovan led Ellie out to the parking lot, where a black SUV sat silently under the pale sunlight. The vehicle bore no license plate, no markings to identify who drove it. It was just a vehicle. But like everything else from the old world Ellie once belonged to, simple never meant ordinary. Donovan said nothing. Quietly, he opened the rear door. From inside, he carefully lifted out an old oak box. Its surface scratched, its brass latch dulled to a weathered bronze. The box looked like a forgotten relic, not kept for its material worth, but for the weight of what it held. Ellie stood one step away, her eyes fixed on the box. Her breathing remained steady, but her shoulders tensed slightly, as if every muscle fiber braced for the inevitable. She didn't move closer, didn't step back. She simply stood still, her body frozen, only her eyes tracking Donovan's every motion. He opened the box, slowly, not for effect, but out of respect. Inside, resting on a thin layer of black velvet, was a silver ring. Small, simple, its engravings worn by time. On the face of the ring, a spread-winged eagle cradled a broken star. Beneath it lay a folded piece of silk, plain stitching, but firm, stained yellow by years. It wasn't just an object. It was a reminder. "We found it in a storage vault in Kabul," Donovan said. His voice wasn't loud, nor was he trying to stir emotion, but every word fell heavy, like iron. No records, no ID, just this, and a piece of paper. He pulled out a small, crumpled note, its ink smeared by either time or tears. 5 words were all it said. Wraith never walks away. Ellie didn't react at first, but then she reached out. Her finger touched the edge of the ring. Cold and real. It wasn't just metal. It was memory. Crystallized. Sleepless nights in Beirut. The echo of footsteps on Bogotá's concrete. Phone calls that were never answered. She touched it not because she needed it, but because it was still there. Her finger trembled. For the first time that day. No one noticed, except Donovan. But he said nothing. He simply stood, still, like a soldier at attention before a fallen comrade's memorial. "They say you saved 19 people in a single night," Donovan said softly, his eyes locked on her hand, "and left no trace behind." There was no reply, no denial, no confirmation. But Ellie's eyes, once as sharp and cold as granite, now held a muted haze. Not weakness, but vision. She was seeing what no one else could. Faces long gone, names erased, promises never kept. She folded the silk, each movement like she was sealing a piece of herself. The ring settled gently into her palm, then disappeared into her pocket. It wasn't hidden. It was carried. No further words were needed. None were spoken. Ellie turned, walking back toward the shop with slow, measured steps. But something had changed. No one saw it. No one heard it. But she knew. Each footfall felt heavier, as if the ground was trying to hold her back with the ghosts of her own past, and she didn't resist. She took them with her, not because she wanted to, but because she had long since learned never to leave anything behind. When she pushed open the shop door, heads turned. No one asked. No one dared. But somehow, they knew, vaguely, that the woman who returned wasn't quite the same as the one who'd left just minutes ago. She said nothing, just returned to her workbench. But her silence now wasn't the quiet of someone with nothing to say. It was the silence of someone carrying a buried war, now waking, one piece at a time. Dear audience, take a breath. Grab a glass of water. The story isn't done yet. What comes next may surprise you. And while you're here, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always exciting to see someone tuning in from across the globe. Comment 1 if you enjoyed the story, so we know to keep bringing you more just like this. That night, Ellie did not return to her familiar little apartment tucked behind the laundromat on Park Street. She didn't turn on the lights, didn't check the mailbox, didn't stop at the diner on the corner, where the cook always topped up her coffee without charging. Instead, she drove her old pickup out of Livingston, racing toward Bozeman in the darkness, as if her instincts guided the wheel instead of her thoughts. The truck rolled slowly along deserted roads. Its engine rumbled like a whisper of unwelcome memories. 30 miles later, she halted in front of a signless red brick building, nothing but a single bronze eagle mounted above the doorframe. A veterans' hall, once tasked with preserving the remnants of those who never got to tell their stories. Ellie stepped out of the truck. Her hands didn't tremble, but her footsteps felt heavier than any time she'd walked here before. She had once sworn never to return after that night they handed a folded flag to the widow of a comrade whose name never appeared in any paper. The door creaked open. Inside, a long corridor reeked of aged wood and furniture polish. Black and white photos lined the walls, the soldiers' faces frozen in time, some with smiles, some with eyes knowing they'd never come back. Ellie didn't pause at a single photo. She already knew each name, too familiar to need rereading. She walked straight to the archives at the corridor's end, where fluorescent lights flickered, as if deciding between revealing or concealing. A young clerk sat there, half skimming through a file. He looked up and froze. There was something in this woman's eyes that made the room feel smaller. "I need the files from Unit 42, she said, voice steady but firm. "From 88 to 92. The clerk blinked. "That's classified, ma'am." Ellie didn't flinch. She just looked at him. Her gaze wasn't threatening, but it was cold. Cold enough to make him swallow hard. "I'm not an outsider," she said, and needed no more explanation. One sentence, but heavy enough to pierce the spine of that young man. He stood and fumbled through a ring of keys, muttered something inaudible, then unlocked a metal cupboard whose paint was chipped and worn. After a few minutes, he brought out a dusty metal box sealed with faded, peeling tape. He placed it on the desk, without daring to lift the lid. Ellie did that for him. Inside lay fragments of a life she'd buried. A rumpled map, pencil markings across its surface, black and white photos of faces now dissolved into memory. Among the papers lay a handwritten letter, old, confident handwriting. She recognized it instantly. "Wraith, if you're reading this, it means the light has returned. We never left." No signatory, no date. But Ellie knew who wrote it. She folded it with both hands, as though folding a memory only she could understand. And then she found a photograph, one she didn't remember being taken. It showed her, nearly 30 years younger, standing among 3 other soldiers. One missing a leg, perched on an ammo crate, but still smiling. Another wore sunglasses, his hand on her shoulder, smiling, though his eyes didn't follow. And then there was her, face solemn, eyes sharp as steel, but standing with her team, fully part of it. Memories flooded back, unordered, illogical, unstoppable, like a dam bursting after years of holding back. The nameless missions, the calls in the night, the vows never spoken aloud, and one promise she had broken, to stay alive. No one blamed her, but she had never forgiven herself. She didn't cry, didn't sob, but her hands clenched tight, knuckles went white, as if letting go meant letting the past escape, never to be reclaimed. She sat there for a long time. No one disturbed her. No one dared. Because the silence surrounding her wasn't loneliness. It was a quiet reverence for what never made it into the history books. At dawn the next morning, before the sky had fully cracked open with light, Ellie slipped away from Livingston. No warning, no messages left behind, no notes. She drove east through thick morning mist until before her emerged an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Billings. Once a military supply depot, it now lay like a silent hollow shell, hidden by waist-high weeds. A rusted sign reading Dixon Storage swung loosely from a bent nail, swaying as if awaiting the final gust to sweep it away. She parked her truck by the roadside, without glancing back. The door shut softly behind her. Metal whispered into the quiet air. Ellie walked straight to the side of the warehouse, where a rotten plank revealed a small entrance. No flashlight needed. She'd passed through here hundreds of times before, in nights darker than this, when every step might herald death. She recognized every cracked brick, every rusted scent, every creak of the dry wooden floorboards under her boots. Inside, absolute silence prevailed. A thin dust layer coated every surface, but in the far corner, where light could not reach, was what she sought. Beneath the concrete floor, covered by an old rubber mat, sat a military-grade safe. No keyhole, only a keypad. Ellie knelt, her knee touching the cold ground. Her hands slowly entered the code, each digit like a summons from a life locked behind her for so many years. Click. The door swung open with a soft sigh, like a whisper from the past. Inside lay a heavy black backpack, thick fabric, weighted by more than gear, heavy with an untold history. Beneath it was a sealed white envelope, marked with a single word: Initiate. She opened it. Inside was a disposable phone, cheap, durable, hauntingly familiar. The screen lit up. One message appeared. Protocol Delta 7 is active. Confirm status. Without hesitation, Ellie typed with steady fingers. Wraith confirms. Ready. A few seconds later, another message. SEAL team inbound. Observe. Do not engage. Target is moving. Ellie stared at the words, unblinking. At that moment, past and present merged. She stood, slung the backpack over her shoulder. Its weight didn't bend her. It lifted her. Because now, Ellie was no longer just the rusty wrench mechanic. She was Wraith. And Wraith had awakened. Her footsteps echoed on the concrete, like a countdown ticking away. Memories surged, not in order, but like a torrential current pulling her back to places unmarked on any map. Somalia, Belgrade, Caracas, nights stalking behind razor-wire fences, slipping across borders guided only by darkness and lethal resolve. Hands once used to fitting spark plugs and tightening bolts now braced to squeeze triggers. Eyes once scanning oil leaks now scanned for movement within shadows. Every heartbeat didn't just pump blood, it pulsed with ferocity, something not taught but forged in the furnace of survival. Ellie knew this much. With Delta 7 activated, there was no turning back. This was no longer the story of a retired soldier. It was the final call for those presumed dead. And she, though never truly gone, was returning, not for honor, not for glory, but for a promise never forgotten. She stepped out of the warehouse as though she'd never entered. But this time, the wind didn't pass her by. It followed her, as if the very air recognized that Wraith had returned. And the world, though unaware just yet, would soon feel the silent footsteps reclaiming what was hidden in the darkness. 3 days later, on a seemingly ordinary morning in Helena, Montana, a community hall opened its doors for a workplace safety event. A faded banner hung behind the stage, bleached by the sun. A complimentary coffee table emitted the scent of stale donuts. But the atmosphere wasn't the usual kind. Whispered rumors circulated about black SUVs parked in the back lot. A few strangers had appeared around town in recent days, dressed neatly, but with eyes that scanned fast and footsteps that never sounded like ordinary people. Something was about to happen. Ellie sat in the back row, silent as her own shadow, still wearing a worn denim jacket, oil-spattered boots, her eyes fixed on the podium, though she hardly seemed to notice. No one paid attention to her, as always, but that was how she operated. The most important things make no noise. A man stepped onto the stage. Not Donovan. This one was older, salt and pepped hair, sun-weathered skin, shoulders bearing the weight of decades spent in places maps wouldn't name. His posture was steady, each step to the podium deliberate, as if beneath each footfall lay an untold story. No introduction, no title. He simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, scanning the crowd, almost as though looking for someone specific among the many faces. Then he spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, but with a weight that made every word land like a stone. There are stories you've heard about a woman who led 19 civilians through a nameless battle, leaving no trace behind. The room fell silent. No rustle of jackets, no clink of spoons and coffee cups, only complete attention. She is here. He paused, long enough for every heartbeat in the audience to hear itself. Then he said 2 words. Wraith lives. The air thickened, like the world suddenly held its breath. Ellie didn't turn her head. She didn't lower her eyes. She simply looked up. Her gaze didn't waver. No pride. No fear. Just the look of someone who'd lived more than anyone ought to live. A gaze that had witnessed, had held secrets, never asking for acknowledgement. From behind, Donovan emerged, this time in full uniform. No swagger, only humility. He walked down the aisle between the rows, stopping before Ellie. He said nothing. He merely bowed, deeply, hands clasped behind his back. Not a formal salute, but an acknowledgement. Respect. Gratitude. Ma'am, he said, voice almost a whisper, for every operative who survived because of you, we thank you. No one moved, not even the mayor, who had prepared a long speech, remembered where he stood. Everyone stayed silent. And in that silence, Ellie rose to her feet. Her worn boots clicked softly against the floor. No applause, no whistles. This was not a moment for accolades. This was a homecoming, not of a hero, but of a witness. She looked at Donovan. Then she raised her eyes to the seal on stage, still standing tall, eyes fixed forward. She spoke one sentence. "I never forgot." Nothing more, nothing needed, no speech, no medals. Ellie turned and walked out into the morning light, her small and steady figure illuminated by daybreak. She didn't leave to be seen. She left to continue, to remind us that sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest parts of history. She didn't need her name engraved on a stone. Her legacy lived in the hearts of people who had never met her, but remained alive because of her. And if this story touched you, if you believe courage doesn't always need a spotlight, please share it. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories where forgotten names find their voice, where truth is honored with a whispered word. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. We'd love to see you share this with friends and family, especially those who've worn the uniform in the U.S., because sometimes a small story can awaken a great memory.